Thank you for listening to Shulchanaruchharav.com.
Making a ground coffee beverage, or Turkish coffee as it's known as, on Shabbos. So while many Yidden throughout the world enjoy a nice hot cup of coffee on Shabbos morning, many choose to use the instant coffee, while others would like to use the Turkish coffee or the ground coffee bean. And the question is asked, is making coffee using ground coffee that will not dissolve in the liquid allowed on Shabbos? The difference between ground coffee and instant coffee in its manufacturing is that while ground coffee is made through roasting and then grinding the coffee bean and then selling it to the consumer, instant coffee contains one further important step, in which they cook the ground coffee just like you do at home, and then they go ahead and dehydrate it, thus turning it into a dissolvable powder, which is known as instant coffee. The halachic questions that come up regarding ground coffee or Turkish coffee versus instant coffee is, number one, does mixing it with hot water pose a cooking prohibition? While instant coffee has already gone through a cooking process, ground coffee has never went through a cooking process, but rather only a roasting process. And is there an isser of cooking after roasting? A second relevant question that comes up when you make ground coffee, Turkish coffee, is, are you allowed to filter the water from the coffee powder? Something not applicable when you use instant coffee and there's nothing to filter out. So in this halacha, we will focus specifically on the cooking aspect, whether you can make hot coffee from ground coffee on Shabbos, and in Meretz Hashem in part 2, we will focus on whether it may be filtered or not. So ground coffee, which has never before been cooked in water, is subject to the famous debate amongst the Poskim, the Rishonim, and the Poskim in Shulchanaruch regarding whether a pre-baked or pre-roasted food may be cooked in a liquid on Shabbos, as recorded in the Mechaber, chapter 318, halacha 5, and the Alter Rebbe Shulchanaruch 318, halacha 12. And the final ruling of that debate is that lichatchila, initially, one may not cook in a liquid a pre-baked or pre-roasted item. Accordingly, it's clear lahalacha that it is initially forbidden to place Turkish coffee or ground coffee into a klirishin, or to pour onto it from a klirishin, or to place it into a very hot klisheni, as all this has ability to cook. Now, what about placing it into a klisheni and onwards? A klisheni that's not very hot. Can I pour the hot water into a cup and then put the Turkish coffee inside or not? So we find three approaches regarding this matter. Some poskim rule that although we are stringent to give ground coffee which was never cooked in liquid a cooking prohibition, as we stated, coffee is defined as a spice, and it is permitted to place even uncooked spices in a klisheni. And thus you may make Turkish coffee in a klisheni on Shabbos. So rules the Igros Moshe, Chelik Dalet, Tshuva 74. The vast majority of poskim, however, rule that coffee is not defined as a spice, and hence may not be placed into a klisheni that is yatzaledis, just as the final ruling is the foods that have a cooking prohibition, including foods that have never been cooked in liquid, even though they have been roasted, may not be placed in the klisheni, as writes the Alter Rebbe in 318, halacha 12. So rules the Ginas Vradim, the Beheita, the Shai Tshuva, the Chassam Sofer, and other poskim, that coffee is not defined as a spice. However, nonetheless, they all agree that you can make ground coffee beverage by placing it into a kli shlishi or pouring onto it from a klisheni, just like you make tea on Shabbos. And now comes the third approach. The third approach is that ground coffee is considered kali abishal, and thus may not be made on Shabbos at all with hot water. That is yatziledes, even to the kli shlishi, kli revi, as some poskim rule regarding tea. In other words, they say those that are machmir and are stringent, like the poskim who hold there's a prohibition of cooking to make tea on Shabbos even with a kli shlishi, so too with ground coffee. Practically halacha l'maaseh, The mainstream approach follows the second opinion that although we don't consider ground Turkish coffee a spice and we don't put it in a klisheni even if it's not very hot but it's yatziledes, we do allow making ground coffee in a klishlishi or with iri klisheni from pouring water from the second cup into the third cup that already has the ground coffee. This certainly applies for those who are lenient to make tea in this method on Shabbos, but furthermore even those who follow the opinions who prohibit making tea on Shabbos in a shlishi, etc. can be lenient here. Unlike the third approach, as once again the entire idea of whether there's a cooking prohibition on a pre-roasted item is itself a debate. V'dai lanu, and it suffices to be stringent in klisheni, and we don't have to be stringent onwards. So to summarize, it is permitted to make Turkish coffee on Shabbos through using a klishlishi or iri klisheni. And regarding whether one may filter the beverage from the coffee powder, in Meretz Hashem, we will discuss in a further halacha.
Thank you for listening to Shulchanaruchharav.com. Our free services of making Torah knowledge available to the public depends on donors like you. Please help us continue our work through making even a small contribution at Shulchanaruchharav.com under the Daily Halacha Dedication section or in the subscription page. Also, check out our online courses and many sefarim available for purchase that will both enhance your Torah knowledge and help support our work.